At Goldman Sachs Private Wealth Management in Manhattan, Dimitri Kovalenko was denied VIP service due to his accent, so he called his attorney. James, transfer our $850 million portfolio to another bank. Customer service standards are unacceptable. Goldman Sachs Private Wealth Management, located at 200 West Street in Manhattan's financial district, was one of the world's most prestigious wealth management services. Minimum client assets, $10 million. Average client net worth, $50 to $500 million. Services, investment management, estate planning, tax optimization, private banking. Clientele, tech billionaires, hedge fund managers, real estate moguls, generational wealth families. Dimitri Kovalenko, 45 years old, Ukrainian veteran and tech entrepreneur, had a spinal injury from the war in Donetsk, but his mental acuity was completely intact. 15 years since coming to America, now CEO of Kovalenko Technologies, cybersecurity and blockchain solutions, Fortune 500 clients, Pentagon contracts, $3.2 billion company valuation. Personal liquid assets, $850 million diversified across multiple banks. Richard Sterling, 41 years old, Goldman Sachs Private Wealth Management Senior Relationship Manager, Wharton MBA, 17 years in wealth management industry, but problematic regarding unconscious bias and cultural assumptions. Accustomed to ultra-high net worth clients, tendency to make prejudiced assumptions about foreign accents and non-traditional wealth sources. This morning, Dimitri was trying to arrange an appointment for Consolidated Wealth Management. "Good morning, Mr. Kovalenko. Welcome to Goldman Sachs Private Wealth Management," Richard greeted at the entrance of their exclusive client floor, his handshake firm, but his eyes quickly assessing Dimitri's appearance and accent. "Thank you for seeing me," Dimitri replied, his Ukrainian accent noticeable but his English fluent and professional. Richard immediately noticed the accent and began his mental profiling. Eastern European, probably new money, possibly questionable wealth sources, likely doesn't understand sophisticated wealth management. "Please, have a seat." Richard gestured to the luxurious consultation room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lower Manhattan. "I understand you're interested in our private wealth services." "Yes, I'm looking to consolidate my assets under comprehensive wealth management," Dimitri explained. "I see. May I ask about your current asset situation?" Richard's tone was professional but subtly condescending. "I have approximately $850 million in liquid assets across various institutions, plus significant equity holdings in my company," Dimitri stated matter-of-factly. Richard's eyebrows raised slightly, but his skepticism deepened. Foreign clients often inflated their assets or had wealth tied up in unstable foreign currencies or illiquid real estate. $850 million? Richard repeated with barely concealed doubt. "And these assets are primarily in U.S. dollars?" "Yes, entirely in USD, Dimitri confirmed. "We need to analyze our audience. If you could tell us where you watched our video in the comments section and also hit the like button, that would make us very happy." "Mr. Kovalenko, I need to ask some questions about the source of these funds," Richard said, pulling out extensive documentation forms. "Goldman Sachs has very strict compliance requirements, especially for foreign nationals." This was standard procedure, but Richard's tone and approach were discriminatory, assuming Dimitri was a foreign national despite living in the U.S. for 15 years. "I'm a U.S. citizen," Dimitri clarified, "naturalized 8 years ago." Richard appeared surprised but continued his interrogation. "I see. And the source of your wealth?" "Technology company, cybersecurity and blockchain solutions," Dimitri explained. Richard's skepticism intensified. Tech entrepreneurs were common, but $850 million in liquid assets suggested either exaggeration or questionable practices. "Blockchain," Richard repeated with subtle disdain. The word often associated with cryptocurrency speculation and volatile digital assets. "Are we talking about cryptocurrency holdings?" "No, my company provides enterprise blockchain solutions for corporate clients. The liquid assets are from company distributions, stock sales, and investment returns, all traditional equity and fixed income." "And your company's clients?" "Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, defense contractors," Dimitri listed. Richard remained doubtful. Ukrainian immigrant claiming Pentagon contracts and Fortune 500 clients seemed far-fetched. Mr. Kovalenko, I want to be transparent about Goldman Sachs Private Wealth Management's requirements. Richard began his gatekeeping speech. We serve ultra-high net worth individuals with established wealth histories and verified asset sources. I understand, Dimitri replied patiently. Our minimum for new client relationships is typically $25 million in investable assets, but that's just the starting point. We also evaluate wealth stability, source legitimacy, investment sophistication, and cultural fit with our client community. The phrase cultural fit was coded discrimination, implying Dimitri wouldn't belong among their established clientele. Additionally, Richard continued, clients from certain backgrounds require enhanced due diligence. Given your Ukrainian origin, we'd need extensive documentation about your wealth accumulation timeline, tax compliance history, and business operation transparency. This was discriminatory profiling disguised as compliance. While banks did conduct due diligence, Richard was applying stricter scrutiny based on Dimitri's accent and assumed background. I have complete documentation, Dimitri said calmly. The process typically takes 6 to 9 months for complex cases, Richard added, creating another barrier. And frankly, given the cryptocurrency and blockchain aspects of your wealth, our compliance team may have concerns. My wealth isn't from cryptocurrency speculation, Dimitri clarified again. Nevertheless, the Blockchain Association creates regulatory complications. Mr. Kovalenko, I also need to discuss our client community expectations, Richard said, shifting to social gatekeeping. Goldman Sachs Private Wealth Management isn't just about investment services, it's about belonging to an exclusive network. This was elitist discrimination, suggesting Dimitri wouldn't fit socially. Our clients attend exclusive events, charity galas, private investment forums. They expect to network with peers from similar backgrounds, established families, Ivy League connections, traditional business sectors. Richard was implying that Dimitri's immigrant background and tech industry wealth didn't meet their social standards. Additionally, many of our clients are multi-generational wealth families. They have different perspectives than newer wealth accumulation. Newer wealth was coded language for you don't belong with old money families. I understand your concern, Dimitri replied diplomatically, but I'm primarily interested in investment performance and wealth preservation, not social networking. They're interconnected at this level, Richard insisted. Investment opportunities often come through client relationships. If you're not part of that social ecosystem, you miss out on deals. This was Richard creating artificial barriers based on cultural and social prejudice. Mr. Kovalenko, Richard said with false sympathy, I want to be honest with you. Goldman Sachs Private Wealth Management might not be the best fit for your situation. This was the final rejection, disguised as helpful advice. Given your background and wealth source, I'd recommend some alternative options. There are excellent wealth advisors who specialize in emerging wealth profiles. Emerging wealth was another coded phrase for you're not established enough for us. There are some very good firms in Brooklyn that work with immigrant entrepreneurs. They understand the challenges of wealth management for non-traditional backgrounds. Richard was directing Dimitri toward lower-tier services based purely on his accent and assumptions about his background. I appreciate the suggestions, Dimitri said politely, but I specifically need Goldman Sachs's capabilities for my portfolio complexity. I understand the appeal of the Goldman Sachs name, Richard replied patronizingly, but our services are designed for a very specific client profile. The fees alone would be prohibitive for your level. What are the fees? Dimitri asked. We charge 1% of assets under management annually, with minimums of $250,000 per year. For an $850 million portfolio, that would be $8.5 million annually if we accepted your application. Richard was emphasizing the costs as another barrier, assuming Dimitri couldn't afford elite wealth management fees. Mr. Kovalenko, may I ask where your assets are currently held? Richard probed, expecting to hear small regional banks or questionable offshore institutions. Distributed across several institutions, Dimitri replied. J.P. Morgan, Private Bank, Bank of America Private Banking, Citi Private Bank, Morgan Stanley Wealth Management. Richard's confidence faltered. These were Goldman Sachs's direct competitors, all requiring similar minimum assets and due diligence. If Dimitri had accounts at all four, he clearly passed their screening processes. "You already have private banking relationships with those institutions?" Richard asked with new uncertainty. "Yes, I've been managing my portfolio across multiple banks for diversification and specialized services," Dimitri explained. Richard's mental framework was crumbling. Banks didn't accept clients with $850 million in assets without extensive verification. If Dimitri had passed compliance at four major competitors, his wealth was legitimate. "How long have you maintained these relationships?" Richard asked. "JP Morgan for 8 years, the others for 5 to 7 years each." Long-standing relationships meant Dimitri wasn't a flight risk or suspicious wealth holder. Legitimate clients maintained stable banking relationships. While Richard processed this new information, Dimitri's phone rang. Caller ID: James Morrison, attorney. "Excuse me," Dimitri said, answering on speaker. "Hello, James. Dimitri, I have the Goldman Sachs account opening documents ready for review. Should I proceed with the transfer authorization?" Richard stared at the phone. "Transfer authorization? For what amount?" "Actually, James," Dimitri replied calmly, "I don't think we'll be opening accounts at Goldman Sachs. Could you prepare transfer instructions to move the consolidated portfolio to JP Morgan instead?" "Of course." "What amount should I authorize for transfer?" "The full $850 million. I want to consolidate everything under one wealth management relationship." Richard's face went pale. $850 million wasn't an exaggeration. It was real, and Dimitri was about to give it to their biggest competitor. "Also, James," Dimitri continued, "please prepare documentation regarding discriminatory banking practices. This meeting has been enlightening." "Certainly. Should I contact the banking regulators as well?" "Let's discuss that after the transfer is complete." After hanging up with his attorney, Dimitri's phone rang again. This time, U.S. Treasury, FinCEN Director. Dimitri answered on speaker. "Hello, Director Chen." "Dimitri, I wanted to follow up on our conversation about the new cybersecurity protocols for financial institutions. Can your company implement the systems across the banking sector by Q3? Richard listened in growing horror. FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, was calling Dimitri about cybersecurity implementations? "Yes, we're already working with 12 major banks on the rollout," Dimitri replied. "The Treasury contract specifications are very thorough." "Excellent. Your company's blockchain security systems are exactly what we need for transaction monitoring. The Pentagon is very impressed with your work." After the call ended, Richard stared at Dimitri with complete realization of his catastrophic mistake. "Mr. Kovalenko," Richard stammered, "was that the U.S. Treasury Department?" "Yes, we have significant government contracts for financial security systems," Dimitri explained calmly. Richard's hands were shaking. Dimitri wasn't just a wealthy client. He was a major government contractor with Pentagon and Treasury relationships. Companies with those contracts underwent the most rigorous background checks and security clearances possible. Within minutes, Richard's phone buzzed urgently. Text from Goldman Sachs's Managing Director of Private Wealth. "Get Dimitri Kovalenko's application approved immediately. He's been referred by the Treasury Department as a priority client." Richard looked up at Dimitri with panic. "Mr. Kovalenko, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Dimitri replied calmly. "You made assumptions about my wealth legitimacy based on my accent and background. You suggested I use immigrant entrepreneur specialists in Brooklyn instead of Goldman Sachs services. I was simply explaining our standard procedures. Your standard procedures didn't apply to me until you realized I have government connections and existing relationships with your competitors." Richard had no defense. His discrimination was obvious and documented. "Mr. Kovalenko, please give me an opportunity to reconsider your application. Why would I trust my $850 million to an institution that judges clients by their accents rather than their assets?" Dimitri stood to leave. "I'll consolidate my portfolio at JP Morgan, where I've been treated with consistent respect for 8 years." 6 months later, Goldman Sachs implemented comprehensive anti-discrimination training for all client-facing staff, focusing on unconscious bias in wealth management services. Richard Sterling was terminated for discriminatory client practices and violation of professional conduct standards. He never worked in private banking again. Dimitri Kovalenko consolidated his $850 million portfolio at J.P. Morgan Private Bank, which gained significant prestige from managing a major tech entrepreneur and government contractor's wealth. Most importantly, Dimitri established the Immigrant Wealth Access Foundation, providing legal advocacy and financial education for immigrant entrepreneurs facing discrimination in banking services. The foundation worked with federal banking regulators to strengthen anti-discrimination enforcement in private banking, ensuring that accent and national origin never became barriers to financial services. Goldman Sachs issued a public apology and implemented new policies requiring objective client evaluation based solely on assets, compliance, history, and investment needs, not on accent, appearance, or assumptions about wealth sources. Dimitri's company, Kovalenko Technologies, continued growing and now provides cybersecurity systems to 47 major financial institutions, including Goldman Sachs, an ironic twist that Richard Sterling's former colleagues never failed to notice. Sometimes the client you reject becomes the vendor you desperately need. And sometimes the accent you dismiss belongs to the person securing your entire financial system. Richard Sterling learned too late that in the world of wealth management, the most valuable asset is the wisdom to recognize value regardless of how it speaks.